Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this rule and in support of the underlying legislation. The rule before us provides for consideration of 3 measures to support our nation's law enforcement in the face of the Biden administration's disastrous immigration policies. H.R. 7343, the Detain and Deport Illegal Aliens Who Assault Cops Act, would bring real consequences on the heads of those in our country illegally. This legislation would require the immediate detention and deportation of any illegal alien who chooses to assault the men and women who keep our community safe. Additionally, H.R. 8146 would require that the Attorney General provide a full accounting of how this historic and dangerous border crisis has truly impacted the health and the safety of our nation's law enforcement. And finally, H.Res. 1210 condemns the Biden administration's failed border policies that have resulted in 9.3 million illegal alien encounters along our borders in less than 4 years. And that doesn't include those that have evaded Border Patrol. America's law enforcement officers are on the front lines of the Biden border crisis, bearing the brunt of this president's open borders policies that are threatening the security of our nation and laying waste to our communities. We have yet to fully know the true damage done to our national security by 4 years of flinging the doors open to those breaking our laws. But one thing is certain: it is falling on our nation's law enforcement officers, our police officers in big cities and small towns across America, to contend with the consequences of this administration's open borders policy. But the Biden border crisis is only one challenge facing our nation's law enforcement officers. As we witness an alarming surge in criminal activity thanks to the left's anti-police, soft-on-crime policies, it's imperative that we confront the harsh reality. Our law enforcement officers are under attack, both physically and politically. They're being targeted by the radical left simply by doing their jobs, for upholding the rule of law, and for protecting our communities. And to that end, the rule today before us provides for consideration for several measures that stand with our law enforcement officers in the face of these asinine policies that seek to vilify them and prevent them from doing their jobs, including H.R. 7581, the Improving Law Enforcement Officer Safety and Wellness Through Data Act, H.R. 354, the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, in H.Res. 1213, a resolution condemning violence against our law enforcement officers. H.R. 7581 would require the Department of Justice to report to Congress about violent attacks on law enforcement officers and the response of federal, state, and local governments to these attacks. Additionally, H.R. 354 would fix a discrepancy under current law to ensure that qualified active or retired law enforcement officers are not prohibited from carrying a concealed firearm in public settings. There's no good reason why the men and women who put their lives on the line for us every day should have their Second Amendment rights curtailed as they are under the current law. And finally, H.Res. 1213 expresses a sentiment that I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle can fully embrace and get behind: full, unequivocal support for our law enforcement officers and strong opposition to any movement that seeks to defund the police. Mr. Speaker, this is not a matter of statistics or headlines. The soft-on-crime policies that the radical left have championed have only left American families in more danger. Years of Democratic elected officials, including some right here in Congress, calling to defund the police, have vilified the law enforcement officers and prevent them from doing their jobs, leaving people that they serve less safe. Nowhere is this displayed more vividly than right here in our nation's capital. And the rule before us today also provides for consideration of a bill to combat the District of Columbia's anti-law enforcement, pro-criminal policies. H.R. 7530, the D.C. Criminal Reforms to Immediately Make Everyone Safe Act. D.C. law enforcement remains understaffed and overwhelmed by soaring crime rates. Violent crime rates. In 2023 alone, homicides increased 29% from 2022. Violent crime increased 37%, and robberies increased 65%. But what has the D.C. Council done? Well, in 2022, it passed the revised Criminal Code Act, which reduced penalties for violent offenders. And in that same year, the council passed the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act, which targeted D.C. Metropolitan Police Department officers and their ability to combat rising crime. So if the D.C. Council won't heed the concerns of the district's residents, police officers, and visitors from this country and around the world, then it's Congress's job to step in. This mess only encourages lawlessness and puts lives at risk. We've had one of our own colleagues, a member of Congress, carjacked, and a staffer stabbed, among many other horrifying and violent crimes. If we can't get a handle on crime in our nation's beautiful capital, how does that fare for the rest of the country? H.R. 7530 changes the maximum age limit for youthful offender status from 24 years old to 18 years old. It requires the district's attorney general to establish and update a public website containing juvenile crime statistics in the district and provides the D.C. Council from enacting any changes to criminal sentences. Youth criminal activity has skyrocketed along with every other manner of violent crime in our nation's capital. And soft-on-crime approach is simply just not working, putting the lives of innocent residents and visitors in danger and hamstringing the ability of our cops to do their jobs. Residents of D.C. have the same rights as other Americans to be secure in their homes and to be protected against crimes committed against their lives and their property. It's heartbreaking to see the crimes committed by children and young people in D.C., and we need real solutions to address them. Children in our nation's capital deserve better than anti-police policies that lead them to a life of crime. It is our duty as members of Congress, as laid out in the D.C. Home Rule Act, to step in when the district's own policies so clearly threaten the safety of the residents of our nation's capital as they do today. And finally, the rule before us provides for consideration of H.R. 8369, the Israel Security Assistance Support Act. Mr. Speaker, it is frankly shocking and disgusting to hear that President Biden is purposely withholding our nation's arms shipments to Israel as they're fighting to defend their right to exist. At a time when Israel is under assault, facing attacks from Hamas and Iran, the decision to withhold these critical munitions is not just a failure. It's a betrayal of our greatest ally in the Middle East, and it goes directly against the will of this Congress and the will of the people. We cannot let political games endanger lives. H.R. 8369 would ensure that America stands with Israel in its darkest hour, despite this administration's disgraceful actions to block such vital support. The legislation will ensure that any defense articles and defense services for Israel are delivered expeditiously, without obstruction from this administration that is willing to play games, unfortunately, with such necessary shipments. And we will prevent them subverting the will of Congress. Mr. Speaker, America must stand with Israel and send a message to the world that we will not falter. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.